Good morning, everyone, and welcome to UQ Pop Center Seminar Series. This is part 2 of Poche research updates, where we get to know what researchers at Poche are up to, or been up to in the past few years. We have 3 speakers today, and they each have 10 minutes. We have all the presentation at the beginning.
10 minutes.
The boss told me 10 minutes, and
It's actually 17 minutes and 34 seconds is
so
what
we
I
do
thought.
all the talks at the beginning, and then we leave the last half an hour to questions.
Right. Okay. Sure.
I'd like to start with acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which we meet today, the Jaguar and Turrbal people, and extend my respect to elders past, present, and futures, people that maintain the cultural and spiritual connection to country. And I'd like to also acknowledge and extend acknowledgement to any Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people online or in the room today. So I just give a quick introduction to the speakers. The first speaker is Dr. Richard Violet. He's a French Canadian from Ontario in Canada. He moved to Mianjin in 2019 to complete his PhD in human services at Griffith. Prior, Richard worked as a research professional for more than 15 years, planning, coordinating, and implementing health and health service research across a variety of spaces. The bio was very long, but I trust you guys read it. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm just introduce Chiara as well. He's a social psychologist researcher who has joined the Poche Center for Indigenous Health at UQ as a research fellow. She received her doctorate from the University of Queensland in July 2021. And Dr. Victor Ogwoma is a senior research fellow that joined UQ in February 2022. Before this time, Victor was a senior research fellow at the Health Research Institute, University of Canberra. And before that, he was a senior research officer at the Menzies School of Health Research in Darwin. And are you the first or Richard? Richard's the first.
Yeah.
Okay. Take it away.
Take it away. Thank you.
10 minutes. I've been reminded by the boss.
It's 10 minutes.
Is the clicker working?
No.
We can just use this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Missing.
Yeah. That's what chapter they're going to get.
Usually.
1 minute is gone, Richard.
What's that?
1 minute is
I know,
gone.
seriously. Okay, the mouse is being tricky, so it may be. Oh, you are?
Yeah.
All right.
Are you?
Can you click? Thank you. So just I would like to acknowledge the Yugarabal, Yugara, Yagara, and Turrbal peoples, the traditional owners and custodians of Mianjin and the countries on which I have studied and lived for the last 5 years. I pay my respects to elders past and present, to your young ones, and to all your future generations. I extend this respect to all Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander peoples and communities across these unceded lands now called Australia, and to all First Peoples and communities across the world. I'd also like to mention before I begin that the seminar does include the name and images of people who are now deceased. So who are you? I've been asked this question so many times across this journey of learning that I've lost count. And to be honest, for much of that time, I don't think I ever truly understand what the question actually meant. It's only now that I understand that this question, it requires an answer in many parts, which includes where I'm from and how I got here. So my name is Richard, and I'm non-Indigenous French Canadian with my roots firmly planted in the boreal forests and lakes of the Témiscamingue region of northwestern Quebec. While I was born and raised in Ottawa, or as my grams would say, down south, I spent 4 months every year living with my grams and gramps at the cottage on Lake Kippawa, deep in the bush of Quebec First Nation. So those summers spent fishing, hunting, and picking berries are some of my most vivid childhood memories. Over the last 20 years, I've coordinated hundreds of research projects, but when I look back, I realize that they've all been done in much the same way. As the researcher, I always chose to adopt the role of the expert, the one who just knows how research must be done. This is how I was trained, and honestly, this is how I've succeeded in the world of academia, where ego, productivity, and output metrics tend to override the actual experience of doing research. So even in projects where I described using the fashionable language of co-design and community engaged, it was in fact I as the researcher who designed, it was I as the researcher who decided, it was I as the researcher who did the research. This growing self-realization and the extreme uneasiness I feel with that role and with the I and with the ecosystem of research itself is what continues to drive me today. So guided by my Aboriginal mentors, Carrie and Michael, I've listened to learn other ways. I've listened to understand other ways, but any respectful engagement with these other ways also requires me to be accountable to my positionality as a non-Indigenous person in Indigenous spaces. So as such, I don't claim to speak on behalf of Indigenous peoples or communities in this seminar, but I do hope that the work resonates. I now know that when I'm asked the question, who are you? This must also be part of the answer. So first introduced in 2004 by Albert and Marina Marshall, Mi'kmaq elders from Unama'ki, the unceded lands now known as Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. Two-Eyed Seeing is a framework which aims to bring together Indigenous and Western worldviews in a collaborative and equitable approach to research. Two-Eyed Seeing means to see from one eye with the strengths of Indigenous ways of knowing, to see from the other eye with the strengths of Western ways of knowing, and to use both of these eyes together for the benefit of all. Being both decolonizing and strength-based, Two-Eyed Seeing seeks to reorient research to emphasize the strength of Indigenous peoples and communities, to promote self-determination and governance, and to counter the deficit framing of Indigenous peoples in the existing research lit. Two-Eyed Seeing provides a framework through which researchers can respectfully engage with the different ways of seeing, knowing, and being healthy. The framework empowers Indigenous peoples and communities to form truly equitable research partnerships through the adoption of a shared perspective in which all viewpoints are equally valued. This is not about integration, but rather a weaving of two perspectives. The individual strands remain unique, visible, and can be teased apart, but once they're woven together, they become stronger. Marshall suggests the powerful image of two trees holding roots beneath the ground to describe this joining together despite our differences. However, what does this all mean for researchers seeking to collaborate with peoples and communities for health research? One thing is clear is that adopting the framework cannot be only symbolic, nor to check off reporting requirements for funding agencies or simply applied at selected stages of the project. Rather, Two-Eyed Seeing must form the unshakable foundation of every decision taken before, across, and beyond the life cycle of our projects. For non-Indigenous researchers, Two-Eyed Seeing involves a double hermeneutic, since it's simply not possible for us to fully grasp Indigenous relational ontologies and epistemologies, no matter how much we may want to. As non-Indigenous researchers, respectful engagement with Indigenous ways is always and inescapably rooted in our own non-Indigenous worldview. Even if some researchers would like to claim that Western approaches to research can align with Indigenous worldviews, the plain truth is they can't. The roots are distinctly different. Accepting this as a fact has important implications for our research designs. So while the Two-Eyed Seeing framework does suggest 6 guiding principles, they're not distinct per se. Rather, they overlap, they intertwine, just like the roots of a tree. So for the purposes of the seminar, we have attempted to tease them out individually, but this is somewhat artificial as there's always more than one principle involved. So principle 1, building authentic relationships with communities is the foundation on which any project in the Indigenous health space relies. If the foundation is unstable, it will negatively impact every aspect of the project. As researchers, we must realize that the strength of this foundation relies heavily on our own ability to critically self-reflect, our ability to unlearn and relearn, and our commitment to unpacking our privilege and standpoint, what some would call invisible work. These critical reflections on our own research practices are essential to ensure that our collaborations enhance sovereignty, engagement, and self-determination of Indigenous peoples and communities in research. The onus of ensuring that these relationships are indeed authentic is entirely on us as researchers, not on the communities who choose to collaborate with us. The simple truth is that just like in everyday life, forming relationships and building trust takes time. Beyond time, building authentic relationships requires genuine engagement. And for that engagement to be genuine, it has to be an ongoing process across the life cycle of our projects and beyond, rather than a single event prior to implementation of a project. To be sure, presenting a planned project at a community event can be part of our overall engagement strategy, but by itself, a single event is insufficient for engagement with community to be truly meaningful. Another important consideration in relationship building is engaging with the community outside of the confines of the project itself. As researchers, it's really easy for us to go into our projects with our blinders on, focusing solely on the project itself and divorcing ourselves from local context. But it's equally important to dedicate time to get to know the community, to learn about the local history and the important cultural sites and spaces. It's also important for us to gain a nuanced understanding of the relationship that communities have with research. Some communities have had amazing experiences collaborating for research, while for other communities, collaboration has been challenging and in some cases even harmful. So it's important to realize that our projects, they don't happen in a vacuum. A community's past experience with research is going to affect all other projects to come, and an understanding of those experiences ensures that we don't repeat mistakes that have already been made. So principle 2, reciprocity in health research can mean many different things, but within two-eyed seeing, it ultimately speaks to ensuring that both community and researchers benefit from the collaboration. To be sure, researcher benefits are clear from the get-go. By simply allowing us the opportunity to access community spaces for research, we benefit. Yet far too many health projects remain fly in, fly out, data extracted from community unidirectionally, and with very little benefit for the communities who choose to collaborate with us. But how does one do reciprocity? That's like my favorite question. And it's definitely not an easy question to answer. So for many researchers in the space, the default to reciprocity is financial incentives and honorariums. While we absolutely agree that financial compensation for time and expertise are essential, we also believe that there are many other forms that reciprocity can take. For example, hiring local for project support, upskilling and capacity building, supporting existing outreach activities, leveraging our own networks to foster connections and partnerships, creating alternate pathways to academia, supporting evaluation and write-up of existing community-led projects, or even just championing a local initiative through our own networks. I mean, just like in academia, health services, they function in a space that is underfunded, understaffed, and time poor. So offering up our own time, expertise, and resources can be just as valuable for community as financial incentives. Another important thing to remember as researchers collaborating in Indigenous health spaces is that what we perceive as community benefit may not be in fact what the community is seeking out of that collaboration. Imposing these perceived benefits from our perspective as academics is counter to the essence of two-eyed seeing. Rather, what we need to be doing is inviting the community to tell us what they wish to gain from this collaboration. And the only way to do so is to engage, hold space, and listen. The truth is, when communities are given the opportunity, they have very, very clear expectations of research collaborations. So within two-eyed seeing, collaborators' sovereignty and self-determination through meaningful engagement is the ultimate demonstration of researcher reciprocity. Principle 3. Two-eyed seeing describes this principle as the responsibility that we have as researchers for the well-being of the research team, project collaborators, and the wider community by promoting health and wellness. This is not a simple ask, and it's not a responsibility to be taken lightly by researchers. Ensuring that there are meaningful relational accountability processes embedded in research starts right at project design. For example, adopting strength-based approaches to shift pervasive deficit narratives, developing salutogenic data collection schedules with the focus on innovation and solutions. Another important aspect here is the accountability to our Indigenous colleagues, mentors, collaborators, community members, and everyone else who involves their own personal networks in the project. We must always remain mindful that we respect these existing relationships and that we don't damage reputation or community standing of those who so generously open up their networks to us. These relationships may embody kinship networks and responsibilities that include multi-generational obligations to ancestors and future generations, while our own relationships may only last for the duration of a project. Other examples of relational accountability could include the validation of findings prior to dissemination, ensuring there's no risk of cultural disclosure, the acknowledgement of community collaborators and all project outputs in the manner that they prefer, to include language, social nation groups, community names, in addition to standard author credentials. While it may not be standard publishing practice yet, the inclusion of this culturally significant information is extremely meaningful. It recognizes the importance of place and connection to country of our Indigenous collaborators and ultimately honors the ethical and relational accountability of that collaboration. So principle 4, While Indigenous researcher involvement in Indigenous health research should be the default research team structure, it is not always the case. To be sure, Indigenous researchers occupy a challenging position within academic research systems, a system that's filled with cultural burden, expectations, and tokenism. Many of our Indigenous colleagues have shared that that when they're invited to collaborate on projects, the invitation often feels like an afterthought, done at the tail end of project planning. While still identified as co-CIs on the application, their involvement in the project is often framed in a cultural consultancy role with relatively few opportunities to actively contribute to the project. So collaborating with Indigenous researchers must be more than just a checkbox. These researchers, their lived experience, their connections to culture and community, their knowledges and expertise are all essential features for successful research collaboration. The skill sets that they bring to the table are highly unique and are very often skills that we don't have ourselves. Engagement is a great example of this. The thing is, engagement, relationship building, it's a human relational process. It's not a method. It's an organic, two-way process based on respect and trust, and it can't be forced. Plainly said, it's our Indigenous colleagues who are the experts here, and it's important that we follow their lead. In Two-Eyed Seeing, Marshall talks about mentorship as grounded and built on two-way learning. The use of the word grounded implies that the mentorship is not just about skill development, methodological expertise, but rather it's a mentorship that's rooted in lived living experience and contextual insight. So for researchers, particularly early career, this grounding of our mentorship in lived and living experience reminds us that every interaction we have with Indigenous peoples, from academics to community members to strangers on the street, it's an opportunity for us to listen and learn. So principle 5, privileging Indigenous ways in academic research is not an easy thing. The unfortunate reality is that universities, funding agencies, academic journals, they privilege some types of research and some types of knowledges over others, with the consequence that research rooted in Indigenous worldviews is often and unjustifiably seen to lack legitimacy. As researchers, if we are to collaborate meaningfully in this space, we must also work to transform the system of research from within. Two-Eyed Seeing offers an approach to research which can serve as a tool to resist institutional structures and processes that devalue Indigenous worldviews and undermine Indigenous ways in research. Two-Eyed Seeing offers an approach for us to celebrate epistemic diversity and centers the importance of two-way learnings. So one of the important ways that Two-Eyed Seeing does this is it creates this unique opportunity for linked yet distinct research processes to run parallel to each other. So what this means for our actual research practice is that it's possible for our projects to have multiple purposes, which can satisfy both community and researcher needs simultaneously. As researchers, we already know this to be true. The same qualitative data set can be analyzed and interpreted from multiple perspectives to answer multiple research questions. Another example of a linked dual strategy is for knowledge dissemination. So much too often, researchers impose their own academic dissemination strategies on collaborators, project reports, peer-reviewed publications, which are themselves imposed on us by the ecosystem of research, funding reporting milestones, academic publisher parish. While these outputs may be well-intentioned, they are often not particularly useful or meaningful for communities. So while certainly not a regular academic practice yet, these uniquely linked dual research processes are undeniably the most important outcome of Two-Eyed Seeing. Principle 6, and the last one. As non-Indigenous researchers, it's important to accept that we will never be the experts in this space. While we may be well-versed in Western academic research designs, methods, and analysis, the communities who choose to collaborate with us are the sole experts of their experiences and contextual reality. We are but guests in a space that is not ours, and we must honor that ethical space by deferring to community expertise, honoring the knowledge that's shared with us, and respecting that some of this knowledge is not for us to share. For example, the validation of findings by community prior to dissemination. It's not simply about sending out a draft manuscript or a report prior to your submission for comments and feedback, but rather it should be an ongoing element of your engagement strategy. Embedded in engagement processes, yarning and yarning circles are less burdensome processes to validate findings and foster meaningful two-way exchange in a format that remains accessible and meaningful for our collaborating communities. Asking community to read over a draft manuscript is simply not an effective process. For researchers, deferring to Indigenous leadership across the project lifecycle requires us to listen to community at every step of the way. Many challenges in the community engaged research can be avoided by simply fostering two-way communication and creating meaningful space for community concerns and insights to be voiced and to be heard and to be actioned. If problems arise, it's important that any solutions identified come from community, or at a bare minimum, are the result of consultation. This principle is tightly woven with the others and is, of course, highly dependent on the quality of the relationships that you build early on in the collaborative process. And as my mentor, Carrie, has always told me, when in doubt, consult. So just a few closing remarks. Undeniably, the inclusion of lived experience in health research was a major paradigm shift in academia, and we must recognize the monumental importance that this shift has for Indigenous health research. Health research in community is increasingly being led by Indigenous researchers in partnership with their own communities and utilizing methodologies and approaches which are themselves rooted in Indigenous worldviews. And this is how it should be. This doesn't imply that non-Indigenous researchers are excluded from these spaces, but we must recognize that our role is changing. It's our responsibility as researchers to support this shift. For collaborations to be meaningful, we must work alongside peoples and communities to resist and ultimately dismantle the existing ecosystem of research which devalues, challenges, and questions the validity of Indigenous ways. And through our collaborative projects, we must support Indigenous peoples and communities to rebuild a system of research which promotes their self-determination in research spaces. So Marshall uses the example of a sledge to illustrate this. He says, "We, the elders, are dragging the sledge with all our might, and we need others to help us by pushing as hard as you can on the rear of that sledge. But it is we, the elders, who will determine where that sledge goes." Other times, that heavy sledge represents a passion we elders hold that Western science can help address. Then we, the elders, will help you with that sledge. You drag, we push, while we exchange understandings about where the sledge is going. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Richard. Let's see you, Carol.
Off the hook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so my project is a scoping review of evaluations of relationships and sexuality education, programs for young people in Australia, and exploring themes like co-design, cultural safety, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander understandings of health. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the country of the Turrbal and Niagara people where I live and work and where we also meet today. I also want to acknowledge the lands on which any of the people watching online might be coming from. I acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people throughout this continent as the custodians of the unceded lands, skies, and waterways. And I recognize their ongoing cultural and spiritual connection to this country and to the many countries within it, and acknowledge the wisdom, knowledges, law, language, songs, stories, dances that come from those millennia of connection and custodianship. I would like to recognise and pay my respects to those who were, are, and will be, and also pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues in the room. And also online. I would particularly like to express my gratitude to many of the people I have had the fortune and opportunity to learn from through many conversations I've had since I started here a little over a year ago. That has been amazing for me and has very much informed the way I go ahead in research. And obviously my position, my position is that I am a settler and I'm really grateful for the privilege of being on this land and learning from everyone. So next slide. Okay, so the topics I'm going to cover is a little bit about me, scoping review, and if we have time, other projects and future directions. Next slide. So I was born on the land of the Yagara and Ugarapul people, and then I grew up in Mianj in Brisbane on the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people. I did my undergrad at the University of Queensland and I had a focus in social psychology. So I've been at UQ in one capacity or another since 2011. So my research has kind of covered various aspects of understanding how people think around issues of deviant behaviour. So that's included child sexual abuse, partner violence, and sexual consent among adults. And in my PhD, my focus shifted to understandings of things like partner violence and sexual consent and these kind of social factors that may drive the identification or unsupportive responding in response to disclosure and also ongoing perpetration and victimization. I've included a picture of my dog up there because for much of my undergraduate degree, he was my biggest support. He saw every presentation first. And helped me get over the nerves and was always supportive with a little bit of a wag of the tail. So, and then now I'm obviously working here and I've shifted more from understanding kind of the drivers of these problems to wanting to focus on more of a prevention through education and moving away from that problem focused narrative, which is part of the knowledge I have gained since starting in this position. Next slide. Okay, scope review, next slide. Okay, so I want to do a scoping review to kind of understand what's been done in this area. Long before that, I had a great chat with Amanda Sidisato, a bit about her experiences in sexual health education more broadly. From that chat and also just kind of my background, these are kind of the key themes that I wanted to look at in terms of a review. So that review would be looking at evaluations of existing relationships and sexuality programs around Australia, both those targeted towards Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but also those kind of in the mainstream. The reason for that is that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are not always going to be in specialist programs or schools, so I think it's important that all programs kind of are appropriate and are touching on the necessary key themes. Through this process, Lauren Trask, she introduced me to Stephen Harfield's quality appraisal tool. So that has kind of been a really great resource on this. I wanted to make sure that my research and my evaluation of the projects that I was looking at was obviously addressing actual identified needs based on co-design, peer-led programs, and using appropriate methodologies. I'm also interested in what the intervention content is. So this was largely based on my research background personally, looking at affirmative consent practices. For those who aren't familiar, affirmative consent is differentiated from other ideas of consent, crucially by the fact that it puts responsibility on seeking consent, as opposed to you assume yes in the absence of some sort of indication of a no. Partner violence, including coercive control. So that's a range of non-physical behaviors that are used to kind of entrap people in these types of relationships. Social context is a big one. My research looks at beliefs around romance, gender, and that sort of stuff. And I'm really interested in how that plays in. And then there's also kind of broader things like social media and the impact that has. And then gender, sexuality, and cultural diversity are obviously really important components. And then outcomes, my original approach was very psychology-based, behaviours, student and staff reports and feedback, knowledge, attitudes and norms, and behavioural control. Next slide. So I did not get this done necessarily in the order I wanted to because my winter scholar arrived before I had done everything. But through talking with my winter scholar, with Minnie Hazel, we discussed a bit of the protocol, what the purpose of the review was to look at what's been done and what are the gaps. We have done some initial screening, consulted with the library staff in terms of search terms, and talked about the importance of addressing like barriers and facilitators that come out of this research. Next slide. Another big impact on what I'm planning to do was from Arnie Mary Martin's presentation on health and understandings of health. So that was really kind of eye-opening for me. It covers, health as physical, social, emotional, and cultural well-being, which is just a much broader perspective. And it really resonated because a lot of those diverse components of health are really well mapped on by all the kind of diverse components of like what is restricted or impacted by partner violence. So there's like financial, community access, culture, spirituality, all sorts of very complicated and holistic approaches. So I thought that was really, really cool. health as individual versus collective. This was another thing that I hadn't considered. So that was really interesting to think of how, community well-being can be a factor, that it's not just an individual focus, and the importance of self-determination, autonomy, and control. So amplifying Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices and centering the voices of young people in these discussions. Next slide. I then had an amazing chat with Jane. So that was looking at kind of going beyond prevention-focused education. It's all very well and good to talk to people about these things and let them know how to recognize warning signs and that sort of thing, but also the importance of knowing what to do when something does happen. We discussed all the challenges that there are in accessing help and potential barriers in that, and how it'd be really good to have that as part of programs as well. So we wanted to evaluate whether these programs and evaluations touched on that. Protective strategies, things like managing conflict and stress and healthy coping, and extending the use of the quality appraisal tool. This may seem like common sense, but I was previously using it to evaluate other people's research, and Jane suggested it'd be a good idea to use it as the plan for my own. And I don't know why that wasn't obvious immediately, but thanks, Jane. Is she in the room? No. Next slide. So the bold highlighted stuff is just kind of key changes to what I'm looking at. So really emphasizing that peer-led component, and using that tool to actually plan my own project, and then focusing on the various facilitators, extending beyond knowledge and going to like coping strategies and like help seeking and what the actual tangible things are there. Community wellbeing is a core component, and something that came up in that connection with holistic approaches to help is the importance of like connection to country and land. So seeing if programs bring that in as well, and then self-determination. Next slide. Well, how much time do I have?
About 3 minutes.
Cool. Okay, next slide. So some other programs I'm working on is the Young Deadly Free project, which we're looking at an evaluation of relationships and sexuality education teacher resource, which is really awesome. And my work on the scoping review has kind of informed some of the input I've made on that project, which has been very cool to see. Let's talk about it. Sexual health project, looking at behaviors and experience linked to STI acquisition and transmission, but that has kind of informed a lot of my thinking around things as well. Child sexual abuse project, reviews of programs and contributors to withdrawal of allegations from within the legal system. So that's a really kind of interesting point. And then a continuous quality improvement scale, which provided me with a great deal more knowledge on how health services and service delivery more generally works and improves. Next slide. So some future directions. A lot of this came from Jane. Feel sad she's not in the room. So from the chat I had with Jane, we talked about how it would be really cool to develop and test a flowchart that is a resource that can be given to young people, where it's like, if this happens, here are your options. If at each level, like you hit this barrier, here's some options, like that sort of thing, kind of stepping them through the process to kind of facilitate that. And also like, what to do if you don't have paperwork. So something that really kind of hit home for me is what to do if you want your own Medicare card, which you can get at 15, but you don't have access to your birth certificate and that sort of thing, which is just a challenge I hadn't even really thought about in terms of accessing healthcare and rights to privacy and that sort of thing. Next slide. And develop and evaluate a model of protective factors. So this has come from kind of that strengths-based approach and more holistic understanding. So looking at how things that aren't, super surface related to relationships and sexuality education might potentially have a lot of positive kind of spillover benefits from the perspective of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultural strengths, and bringing those into programs and how that can work. Capacity building, something I thought would be interesting in like the country and community connection one, and also community wellbeing, would be seeing like what the benefits of having like teaching the students to bring what they learn into the broader community, and like how to communicate that to other people, being this kind of really capacity building and community wellbeing move. And overall, I would one day eventually love to trial some programs and develop them. Next slide. Thank you. These are all people who either through conversation or like bigger input have impacted my project. I'm very sorry if Amanda is watching this. I accidentally left her name off. Yeah, questions and comments obviously are welcome after Victor has had his turn.
Thank you, Kevin.
Like one of those sticky ones.
Yeah, it's just been annoying today. Does not wanna.
Oh, you don't wait for the clicking to the next slide.
I think it's one of my many talents. Like. It's pretty good. Taking my job off me. See how it is so.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us in this presentation today. I would just want to flag, probably before I get into my talk, that there is a bit of a change in the title of my talk from what was initially circulated, due to some logistics in letting the admin know early about the change in plan. But I will pretty much talk about my journey in Indigenous health research. But before I get into that, I would also like to acknowledge the Yagara and Tagora people and their custodianship of the land in which we are gathered here today, and pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and also recognize every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person seated here today, and those who are listening to us online, and also recognize their valuable contributions to Australia and global society. To start with, I also want to share a little bit of my background. I'm an African. I was born in Nigeria. Most of my adult life was spent in Nigeria. For some of you who do not know, Nigeria is a multi-ethnic country with a history of British colonization as well. And I come from the Igbo ethnic group, which is found in the southern part of the country. And I moved to Australia 11 years ago in the beautiful Larakia country to pursue my PhD at the Charles Darwin University. And most of my life in Australia was spent in Darwin. I lived there for roughly 8 years before moving to Nunawal country at the peak of COVID-19, where I spent a couple of years at the University of Canberra before I was attracted to a position here at the Poche 2 years ago. I've got a quite interesting academic background. Having my early bachelor's in biomedical science, specializing in parasitology, and a master of public health back in Nigeria, before moving to Australia to pursue my PhD. And after my PhD, I sort of went straight into completing a master of statistics through the Biostatistics Collaboration of Australia program. And then when I sort of look at these diverse academic backgrounds, I sort of ask myself, how it's really gonna benefit the work that I want to do within communities. And I sort of see it as it sort of will provide me that ability to be a bit more adaptable to the research needs of the community. Because from the work I did many years ago in Nigeria, it lends to the fact that oftentimes the priority of communities changes, and the more you are a bit adaptable to their need, the better you are, more beneficial and to the community. And my passion for Indigenous health, since I moved to Australia, really stemmed from, witnessing firsthand the impact of social determinants on health outcomes, from where I was originally born, and that commitment to really see how I can contribute to bridging the equity gap, because oftentimes I've wondered, why, some people do well and some don't do well, and how can we, really support those who are not doing well to, achieve their life dreams and have optimal health outcomes as well. And that journey as well, before my arrival at the Poche, also lends to the, the diversity of my academic background. Starting off my career in Nigeria, I worked around programs, looking at controlling neglected tropical diseases. And these, sorts of revolve around going to the hard to reach, communities and doing some sort of outreach programs in terms of malaria screening and diagnosis and distribution of, malaria controlled commodities like, medications and insecticide treated bed nets. But when I moved here in Australia, I worked on a collaborative project between two universities in Nigeria and the Charles Darwin University, which was around understanding the burden and distribution of cardiometabolic syndrome in Nigeria. And then afterwards, I sort of got appointed at Menzies, where I specifically worked as a biostatistician, supporting programs around child health, ear and respiratory health. And my appointment in Canberra was also sort of a 50-50 appointment with supporting the ACT Health and Wellbeing Survey and Dasman Diabetic Institute project with the University of Canberra. And when I look at, what I have done in the past and where I want to see myself, I sort of looking for those opportunities to tap into, new ways of doing things that will be a lot more beneficial to communities. And I've been very passionate about, tapping into, the digital innovations on how to, improving access to healthcare services and also addressing disparities in, primary and secondary preventive services. And at the same time, and also applying, the technical skills around understanding distributions, where are the hotspots and cold spots of these disparities, and which can really inform well-targeted interventions that will really make a difference. And especially in terms of methods like integrating adaptive methodologies, step-wage cluster randomized trials, and also integrating methods that sort of decolonizes the existing ways that we do things that are really dependent on Western ways of doing things. And I could hear Richard speaking about the 2I approach, which really entails bringing in that methods, indigenous ways of doing things, and not just only relying on our Western ways. And then I have also been interested in, applying these methods in peer review. I'm working with Dr. Clinton Shoes, who myself and him are working as editorial board members of the Australian Journal of Rural Health to see how we can embed indigenous ways of, peer reviewing academic journals. And this was just actually some of the pictures I could find from, things that I posted on Facebook many years, where I was involved in many outreach programs. The first panel on the left was a point of care testing on malaria that I did early in the years, in the 2010s, before the project that I worked on diabetes and cardiovascular risk screening. And these this was, myself supervising healthcare workers who are doing, blood pressure measurements. And this was me doing point of care testing, this small cardio check that does all the lipid profiles and fasting blood glucose testings, and, supporting in questionnaire, trying to collect, physical, like behavioral factors and the rest of them. And when I look at the broad areas of my research activity, I feel like it revolves around, the work that I did in my PhD around cardiometabolic disease outcomes, and, the project that I was involved in Kuwait, and the work that I did at the Menzies around child health outcomes, and the biostatistical support that I've also had the opportunity, to support and have ongoing involvement in. And since moving here at the Poche Center, I have been fortunate to be involved in a quite a range number of projects where I, provided by statistical support, some of which are still ongoing and some has been completed. And most of these projects are, the work that we were doing, or we are doing with our partners, UWI, and this is the Queensland Burden of Disease report that we did with the Queensland Health, led by FEDI, the Yelling About COVID-19, which is, led by SHARE. And around the same time, I've also been sort of supporting, some of the existing projects that I was working before moving here, which were all centered around indigenous health research space. So the projects around Menzies are on ER assessment, improving ER assessment, leveraging on the employment of Aboriginal health workers before hospital discharge. And the Hearing for Learning initiative is more of a community-based cluster randomized trial, which is also looking towards improving hearing assessment in children. And some extension of the work from my PhD also led to funding from International Diabetes Federation to do interventions studies on the use of intensive lifestyle education on secondary prevention of diabetes, and the other one is comparing shared care and usual care approach to management of GDM, which are still ongoing, and some extension of the work with Kuwait, which at the time I moved here, there was some conversations around moving the project here, but which didn't really materialize. So one thing that is very peculiar about doing research with communities, especially around the indigenous health, and I realized this, is that ability to build a meaningful relationship with communities, and I feel like this is quite similar to many indigenous cultures. Building a very genuine research partnership with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and health services is quite crucial in our ability to do ethical research, and research that is culturally sensitive, that is relevant and impactful, which also create that opportunity for a co-design process that could translate to more sustainable and long-term benefit for the community, and some of which, like the 2I approach that Richard has earlier flagged, also fits into the benefits of having those genuine and meaningful partnerships. And since I have also joined here, I've been very curious about seeing how we can branch out and expand the scope of our partnership to reach out to more communities and improve, sort of enhance the impact of the work that we do. And currently, we are sort of building, relationship with their health services, and to sort of see how we can do work in some of these regions, Derby, St. George, and where they, have their footprints. I've also been in conversation to leverage on the outreach programs that the Metro North Health provide. They run, programs around 34 communities and see how they could also provide opportunity for us to access a bit more communities to do important research. I've also, within my interest and the work that I've been planning to do, I've also sort of had, challenges in, CIA grants. A lot more success in collaborative grants, but I think by the more we keep building our partnership, and that will create more opportunities, for meaningful research. And I've also been very lucky to be awarded the Poche seed grant, and which currently working on 2 systematic reviews. I've got recently winter scholars who we are very supportive in pushing these ahead, and I'm still working on these, and they are more around trying to build those evidence around how we can improve access to cardiopulmonary rehab, and leveraging on digital tools for integrated patient care for those with multiple chronic diseases. I'm aware that I've only got 1 minute, but I want to use this opportunity to also thank so many people who have been supporting me all of these years to be able to get to where I am today. Thank you.
And we got about 7 minutes for questions, and for any of the 3 speakers. And maybe we can start from online, if there is any question online. No? Okay. Do we have any question in the room from either Richard, Chiara, or Victor?
Just a comment. I just wanted to thank you so much for sharing your stories. It was very much a storying of your journey, and it intrigued me, I suppose, in a lot of ways, and how you got here and what influenced you and your motivations, and how you conduct ethical research with our community. So it makes you for a very safe, culturally safe research. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
The goal follow on too, just from what Nat said, I think is, all 3 of you, so thank you very much, but I think you have all really reaffirmed that nothing about us without us. And, I think that real leveraging of the solutions that community and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people can bring to the table, because they have the answers. I just think in these Western systems, they're never positioned to be able to rewrite their own narrative. So, I think following on from that, so I think, keep doing what you're doing.
Nothing else? You guys are free? Thank you so much for the great talks, and
Thank you
for
the opportunity. It's great.
and none of you made it on time for the time that you got away with that. So it's okay.
I stick away.
You explain things so well that we don't have any questions. So yeah.
There's one for
Yeah.
Can you see it on there? Can you see mouse?
Yeah.
Oh, it's
From,
not a question, it's just someone's joined.
Prabha,
Yeah.
Prabha, do you have a question?
Be great if I could actually.
Melody.
Oh, there you go. Are you able to hear me now?
Yeah. Yes, Prabha.
Yeah, hi. So I just wanted to say the presentations were really, really great. All the three speakers and the amount of work that you're doing and the engagement. I am a senior research officer at Inala Indigenous Health Service, and we do have a working relationship with Poche. So I found that really, really useful, especially the journeys for the non-Indigenous as I am, and working with Indigenous research. It kind of echoed the same sort of journey that I've been on. So yeah, so it was really useful. Just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Prabha. Close for the day then. And the next seminar is in 2 weeks' time, part 3, with 3 other speakers. Thank you all.